Hi, this is the handout I used when this lecture was face-to-face. So briefly, you can see the cover sheet which outlines the lecture. Ignore the original dates. If you wish to study any pages in detail, then just freeze frame. We see here some of the references and quotes used, plus some useful old photos. This is followed by a relevant chronology and a simple line drawing of the Blackpool coast. Next is a thorough chronology of the Blackpool Pleasure Beach that was responsible for the development southwards and the advent of Americanization. And finally, the authentic plans for Hitler's desired occupancy of Blackpool. Check that one out for yourself. Okay, let's go to the lecture now.
So, Harold J. Perkin commented that class consciousness was nowhere more in evidence than in the pleasure resorts. Here I intend to use the term class dispassionately as a means to explain resort development rather than make a value judgment on class per se. Firstly, I'd just like to show you a clip of workers at the time coming out of Hopkinson's, just to give you a familiarity with the lives and the type of people that we're going to be introduced to in this lecture.
And it was shown, we believe, at Hollingwood Wakes in July 1901. This film shows the industrial importance of the factories to local Lancashire cotton and woolen communities. Over 20,000 employees were supposedly working for Lord Armstrong's Elswick Works. At the top right of the screen, Ralph Pringle in the top hat and the most smartly dressed of the people and a cigarette in mouth can be seen descending through the crowds, walking towards the camera and actually choreographing again the movement of people in front of the camera. When this film was advertised in the Oldham area, a note to the showman said that local pictures are the keynote of all animated picture shows in the district this week. The films were actually commissioned the week before the annual wakes, so the workers would often work a double shift in order to get the week off for the wakes weeks. Ralph Pringle at this time was actually working in partnership with A.D. Thomas, but by January 1901 had formed his own company. When the Thomas Edison Animated Photo Company came to Newcastle in November 1900, two of the most consummate showmen working for A.D. Thomas were actually filming on behalf of the Thomas Edison Animated Photo Company. The marketing attraction of this film was apparent, as Thomas and Pringle advertised this film as over 20,000 faces appearing in 3 minutes. Local newspaper reports and showman papers at the time always use people's reaction to the camera as part of the advertising policy, with comments of, "Oi Bill, that's me," or "Did you see yourself last night on the screen?" These were a popular aspect of the advertising campaign.
The Preston Chronicle of the 20th of June, 1835, described Blackpool as a favourite and salubrious fashionable resort for respectable families. Compare this with Edward Bain's Lytham. If the company is less fashionable than at Blackpool, it is generally more numerous and usually very respectable. However, in contrast, by the end of the century, Blackpool had become the principal icon of the working class resort, though in reality never exclusively. Lytham, however, developed as a parasitic middle class resort, able to remain so because of the artificial entertainments provided by Blackpool. So why did Blackpool convert to a mass leisure resort when it had been equally determined to cater for the better off? Research reveals a number of stages, none of which explain the change in isolation, but when brought together offer an important analysis that, if developed, would also disclose a good deal of general information about working class life in the Northwest. The fundamental precursor here was the nature of land ownership. Examined along with Blackpool's entrepreneurial town council, additionally it will be necessary to analyse a range of external influences that turn the town toward a path of popular entertainment, and finally drawing some conclusions as to the implications of change. So let's just continue with our familiarity of working class lives, and we've got an extract now of people leaving the Glebe Millworks, more in their everyday working clothes than before. The Glebe Millworks.
Filmed for the Hollywood Wakes in Oldham in association with Captain Payne Cinematograph Company. This is very typical of the Factorygate films filmed in the Lancashire heartland and the cotton factories. It would have been shown in July 1901 for use on the Fairground Bioscope shows. The children seen in front of the camera would have been child workers. The smaller ones are obviously taking their father's or their mother's lunch to work and can be seen holding the food and standing in front of the camera. All the workforce can be seen wearing clogs, and now we have one of the first stars of the Michelin Canyon films responding with his impish grin to the camera. Unlike other films made by Lumiere and Edison, the operators actually encourage this kind of behaviour in front of the camera and show the vitality and physicality of the audience responding to being filmed. The operators are now organising some kind of procession in front of the camera. However, our two urchins in the middle...
So, let's go back to that fundamental precursor, the nature of land ownership. The most valuable commodity of them all. Not gold or oil, but land. He who controls the land controls the people on it and its produce. Perkin claims that social structure and community development go back to the original pattern of land ownership and selling any leasing policies. His study was primarily of the Northwest, but other studies such as Huggins' treatment of Northeast resorts supports Perkins' thesis, as does David Canadyne's broad-based work. Canadyne maintains that aristocratic land ownership created a conservation interest that became overwhelmingly middle class. The Heskeths and the Scarisbricks controlled Southport, whilst the Heskeths alone were responsible for Fleetwood. Similarly, the Clifton gentry family entirely owned Lytham Manor. Being close to Preston might have determined a popular course for Lytham, but it rapidly became a select residential resort, leaseholding largely enforcing control over development. During the mid-Victorian period, Thomas Clifton became the major shareholder of a land estate company, which then submit only large plots for the building of villas and hotels. Strict covenants were incorporated against industrial use and restricting the commercial activities of the hotels. This coincided with the approach of the railways, and the family developed a single-track line between Preston and Blackpool to maintain some control over the nature of passenger services. Now, all this served to exclude artificial entertainments, creating by 1861 a strong residential interest, at which time Lytham's population exceeded Blackpool's by 2,698 to 2,564. Although both areas were competing for middle-class custom, the different pattern of land ownership of Blackpool set the scene for a less genteel visitor. Originally, Leighton Hawes, which contained the small Blackpool fishing community, was common land, but an Enclosure Act of 1767 shared this out between 108 proprietors. By 1838, 24 of these owned only 25 acres each. Even the Cliftons and Heskeths owned a mere 100 acres each, which they sold to finance their main estate developments. So this fragmented land ownership pattern, with no single local grandee to dominate, ensured that Blackpool began as a community of small freeholders with the power to dispose of their property as they chose, a radically different situation than that of Lytham or Southport, or even Eastbourne under the Duke of Devonshire. The sale of Hesketh land to the Bonney estate usefully illustrated this freedom, then reselling it in small building plots, thus creating unplanned development with small terraces and narrow streets, leaving no scope for the broad avenues and villas of the planned resorts. Perkins suggests this created a friendlier, more welcoming atmosphere for the poorer day tripper. Therefore, while Blackpool was still encouraging the middle-class industry from the Lancashire towns, its urbanisation process was becoming more conducive to their employees. In common with towns such as Brighton, commercial development was under the auspices of private enterprise. However, such developments might have been frustrated had Blackpool's council been controlled by powerful residents. By the mid to late Victorian period, local authorities were quite active in local improvements. Yet unlike the inland towns who did this for improving welfare, the resorts in general were concerned with the commercial boost to the holiday industry, with a view to providing additional inducements to holidaymakers to leave their money behind them. Given the common motive, Blackpool continued to progress quite differently. Those resorts planned by gentry families had built up resident populations of greater power on local councils than the holiday industry representatives. They were determined to maintain their towns as select areas with gardens and parks. Local landlords in Bournemouth were determined to maintain a high-class watering hole. In 1878, the threat of a commercially owned pier brought the reaction that this would make Bournemouth into a sort of tea and shrimp resort. The council hastily gathered, and the chairman concluded that a pier in the hands of the commissioners would be better than one in the hands of a company whose object might be to make it attractively, probably in a way which the residents of Bournemouth would not approve. This was typical of the reports based upon leaseholding. Lytham has continued along this path to the present day. So let's look at one of Blackpool's piers, the North Pier, to see once again the people. The pier is absolutely crowded. Look at the way they dress. They don't. They're there in their Sunday best and their finery. They don't dress like modern people going on holiday, shorts and flip-flops. And we'll just say, and of course, North Pier was the first pier in Blackpool, and it was regarded as the middle-class pier, unlike Central Pier.
gentlemen in the bowler hats and ladies in their hats. And there's a bottler. You didn't pay for the entertainment. They used to come round and do a collection, which was called bottling. Some of the artists were better at bottling than others. North Pier, Blackpool. Look at the crowds on there. This was one of the things that was popular about piers. It let the ladies of the day in their floral hats and their long dresses and the bustles walk out to sea without getting on a boat. There was never any question of being seasick. And the gentleman, look at him with his top hat on and silk revers on his coat. And the boys and the children all smartly dressed. And it was a great thing to be together. They just kept walking and strolling about. No fighting, no nothing. Look at that lady with a cape on there. I think we always referred to that type of a hat as a cowpat hat that sat snugly on top of the head. But they had a lot of pleasure in coming to Blackpool, and they would do that day in and day out. Oh, look at that, it's a boy with his school cap on. He must have just passed something, and he's proud of what he's won. They were certainly coming to enjoy themselves. You have to remember that these people, this was the only break. They worked 51 weeks a year in cotton mills. That is the shot along the promenade now, which is there. The big wheel is no longer there. That's now on the central pier. And the building there is the Palace Theatre, which was a theatre, cinema and ballroom. And of course, adjoining it, just across a very narrow street, was the Blackpool Tower building with the tower.
So, the next layer influencing Blackpool's development, and that was Blackpool's entrepreneurial town council. In Blackpool, from its humblest beginnings in the 18th century, when Leighton Hawes possessed half a dozen innkeepers, providing accommodation for bathers, the community was established and dominated by the holiday industry entrepreneurs. At the time of incorporation in 1876, among its 27 councillors, 16 connected with the holiday and building industry, and 6 were retired businessmen. So corrupt was this oligarchy of vested interest that the composition of the council was drastically increased. However, between 1876 and 1913, although many did not work in the holiday industry, 35 out of the 154 members held 52 directorships in the town, and 2/5 of the council were connected with the drink industry. Well over half of the council were possessed of vested interests, and it is clear that there was a wholehearted acceptance of a working class holiday industry. In this, John Walton aptly terms the council Blackpool Limited. They ran the town as a board of directors with a bipartisan approach. Now, bipartisanship is a political situation, usually in the context of a two-party system in which opposing political parties find common ground through compromise. Economic alliances were paramount, and competition between businesses did not spill over onto the council until the turn of the century clashes between the Tower Company and the Blackpool Pleasure Beach Company, suggesting that cooperation evaporates in the face of severe competition. Blackpool's commercial priorities are evidenced by reports in the Gazette. We can well afford to sink £250,000 in perfecting our seafront. It is our principal marketplace and must ever be our greatest attraction. The town set by principal marketplace contrasts with the Bournemouth attitude noted earlier. That same year, the Blackpool Gazette highlighted the discrepancy between residential and visitor amenities. There's an absence of public parks, contrasting starkly with the lavish arrangements in many other resorts, and even with the provision for the local working class in manufacturing towns of similar size. The council reflected its attitude towards its residents thus. Holiday industry brought tangible benefits to ratepayers. Joyrides of summer visitors helped develop a dense and profitable tramway that more than covered the losses in the winter season. Therefore, the council saw the whole town as benefiting, as long as the first priority went to the holiday industry. Of themselves, the elements discussed so far were insufficient to develop a working class resort. Nevertheless, a pattern of land ownership combined with a municipal council that, while still showing a preference for middle class visitors, was more concerned with whatever brought success and profit to Blackpool, and was primed to meet the outside influences that demanded working class holidays. Moreover, Blackpool's attempts to smarten up the town met with rebuffs. One lady disliked the council's attempt to banish nigger minstrels, stating that she liked something to amuse us going on in the streets while we had dinner and tea. Blackpool is getting too grand. Perhaps you will get a better class of company, much good it may do you. So, therefore, there also existed a range of outside forces that turned the town toward a path of popular entertainment, and of course the first among these was the railways. The development of the railways from the 1840s brought many more visitors to the Fylde coast. The Blackpool branch line of 1846 opened a floodgate, especially at Whitsuntide. A 5-shilling return fare from Manchester and the 8-day 3-shilling return ticket from Millhouse brought about a 12-fold increase in visitors. By 1861, the railways were bringing 135,000 in a season to such a small town, rising to 1 million by 1879 and 3 million by 1903 and 4 million by the year of the Great War in 1914. Yet despite the fact that these fares were not expensive, they prohibited persons of limited means, catering mainly for the lower middle class. However, the Sunday excursion trains began to introduce a mass of working class day trippers to Blackpool. Lytham, with its influential residents and a lord of the manor, were able to lobby rail directors against Sunday excursions, and by the same methods exclude the accompanying entertainments. Blackpool frowned upon but tolerated the artisan excursionists, but unfortunately the affordable day fares brought a non-deferential element. Uninhibited in shouting, singing, dancing and drinking. The presence of these trippers caused offence in a Blackpool, still trying to compete with Lytham and Southport. Worst of all, their visits offended Sunday observers. Southport and Morecambe both attempted with little success to stop Sunday excursions, not on religious grounds, but to stop rowdy day trippers driving away the better class of visitor. Everywhere strove to control and restrict the antisocial working class visitor. Now second, there were some direct external influences. In Blackpool, the influence of the day trippers was responsible for defining the Central Breach area up to the present day. They brought with them the trappings of their home fairs, street vendors, showmen and quacks, nude bathing and athletics. The Blackpool Gazette commented, "They expect to see the attractions of their own towns glorified. They get this one poor pleasure in the sunlight by the sea, and they like it, with a liking that can only be understood by those familiar with their lives." The street entertainers overran the promenade, but the corporation had the power to drive them away. Therefore they went onto the beach below the high water mark, so the corporation bought the foreshore and drove them away again. The traders then secured permission to rent the front gardens of the seafront guest houses, and so was born the famous or infamous Golden Mile. This event serves to illustrate both Blackpool's determination to fight the working class influence and its impotence in resisting. Now the working class Lancashire holiday system. In order to understand this inexorable onslaught on Blackpool, an understanding of its hinterland is necessary. So just show you a quick clip of Wakes Weeks and pouring out of the factories ready to go on holiday.
For 51 weeks a year, the coal pits, factories and cotton mills were busy. But each week in the summer, called Wakes Week, a different town would shut down for the greatest holiday of the year. Originally a one-day holiday of the local patron saint, by Mitchell and Kenyon's day, this is expanded to a whole week free. Factory owners gave no holiday pay. The right to paid holidays wasn't introduced till after the Second World War. So the week before, called Bull Week, all the workers had to work double shift to keep up productivity. Little surprise then, they looked so exhausted in these films. Richard and Kenyon rushed from one town to the next throughout the summer months, filming workers leaving their factories and handing out leaflets to let people know where the films were to be shown. When Wakes Week finally came along, Richard and Kenyon joined the holidaying throng as they took a train to the seaside. Holidays were the new wonder of the age, and the most important resort for the north of Britain was Blackpool. What this meant is during the holiday season, entire towns transferred here, which meant that effectively you went on holiday with your neighbours. Some people came for one day, others who'd saved up lots of money would stay for the entire week. Blackpool was, I suppose, rather like Marbella and Alton Towers combined, exotic, romantic, magical. Blackpool was booming. Over 2.5 million visitors came within sight of the Blackpool Tower each year by 1901. Soon the promenade had to be extended. The sheer pressure of visitor numbers meant that widening it became inevitable. Builders used sand from the beach to broaden the road by 100 feet. Blackpool even then was seen as the most working class of the seaside resorts. It was unpretentious, with a huge number of pubs and many open-air amusements. Other resorts had different reputations. Next door, Lytham St Anne's was posher, while Southport was both religious and sedate. People flocked to the West Coast resorts in particular because these towns were accessible by the new train routes. City dwellers from neighbouring cotton towns and places far further afield could be transported to the sea in a couple of hours. Morecambe Bay was particularly popular with people from the other side of the Pennines because of the direct train routes from Bradford and Leeds. Morecambe became known as Bradford by the Sea. There were all sorts of entertainments, from the tasteful to the tasteless to the bizarre. Fortune-telling, waxworks, and two-headed mermaids in the less smart areas. It's not immediately obvious what this man is selling. It looks to me like it could be foxtails. This film shows entertainment on Victoria Pier, Blackpool. There's a crowd gathering, chaps playing instruments, One looks very sedate. Ah, a poster. H. Flockton Foster. Entertainers 3 times daily. What's in store? Very smart crowd. Seaside clothes, but I say smart. They're formal ties and boaters. Ah, the kind of Gilbert and Sullivan number, sort of naval attire. The girls are all moving together. The men are moving together, going backwards and forwards, round about each other. Absolutely, oh my God, cartwheels! Absolutely lovely. And the crowd are sadly half of them looking at the camera. Oh no, look, there's a chap here. What's he doing? He's collecting money in a hat. Must be working for Mr. Foster. Very, very cheery scene.
By the 1890s, Blackpool had acquiesced to working class holidays, but retaining middle class enclaves at North and South Shore. The Blackpool Gazette elaborates on how the specialised working class resort became possible because of the nature of holidays in Lancashire. Blackpool benefited from the Lancashire holiday system. They had longer, consecutive annual summer holidays than anybody else in industrial England, and a regular working week made savings easier. Other areas concentrated their efforts on August bank holiday. This made them overcrowded for a short period but gave no incentive to develop permanent amenities. Blackpool's main holiday season was from the Burnley Fair in July until the Oldham Wakes in September. In addition, from the last quarter of the 19th century, real wages had increased considerably, not only from actual income, but also from falling prices. In Lancashire, the earning power of the whole family was much greater than somewhere like the North East, where women rarely worked outside the home. Well before the 1890s, the institutions of thrift that had been instilled into the working classes guided consumer spending. The full week Wakes holiday at the seaside was becoming a regular feature of upper working class lives. By the late century, the friendly societies had 1.5 million depositors, and the post office had 500,000 working class savers. Additionally, free money was of little use without free time. And interestingly, the arguments over Sunday transportation encouraged the emergence of a free Saturday afternoon. Nevertheless, banning Sunday travel had been severely criticised, and this somewhat ironic extract from Punch reveals. For the first-class passengers, morals are the same on all days of the week. Being accustomed to amuse themselves all the 6 days of the week, it would be cruel to deprive them of recreation on the 7th. But for the third-class passengers, to travel on Sunday is a heinous crime. Toil and hardship are their portion during the week, and enjoyment on the Sunday would make them discontented with their lot. Now there's just one other factor, and that's health in the seaside, and this is quite common to all seaside resorts, but of course it assists in Blackpool. Seaside holidays were actively encouraged during the late Victorian period. Brian Harrison claims that they appealed to the thrifty, respectable working class, self-improving section, often associated with the chapel, cooperative society, and the Liberal Party. These organisations and others such as the working men's clubs began to organise trips. Sunday schools, the temperance movement, and other philanthropic bodies aimed to provide a healthy, attractive, rational and cheap alternative to the local fairs, races and public houses. The temperance movement was particularly interested in this as a diversion of working class expenditure, particularly at a time when drink was beginning to decline in importance. The Blackpool Gazette supports this diversionary view. Numerous central public houses, but little need for intervention, suggest value of Blackpool's counter-attractions as an antidote to drunkenness. An earlier edition had shown a nil growth in public houses, while visitor and resident numbers had increased rapidly. So in the older traditions of rational recreation, the seaside holiday could be justified as health and mind broadening, a view that only declined among the religious-based societies with the advent of dissipating artificial entertainments. And now, considering that the trams played such a big part in the development of Blackpool, and eventually played a big part in the development of the Pleasure Ridge, it would be interesting just to take a diversion here and have a look at some of the trams of Blackpool.
'55 was ex-Accrington and rejoiced in the nickname of Big Bertha or Waltzing Matilda, the latter because of its tendency to derail on tight curves. The Pullmans operated all year round, including the much reduced winter service. One of this class would be the very last car on the 28th of April 1937. The 30-year-old open toppers eked out their existence as seasonal extras, working regularly the 10 miles from the Gyn to Lytham until the end of the 1936 season. On abandonment, the Lytham-owned tracks past the depot were left in situ to provide
So linked with the development of transport is the failure of seasonal and zoning separations within the town. Further to this, these claustrophobic societies, as John Walton terms them, brought with them to Blackpool an advanced market of close community factory workers from the Lancashire cotton towns, all sharing a common culture. Hundreds of thousands of generally like-minded workers demanding to go to their favourite resort was too much to resist for a council preferring success to residential amenity, and had a powerful influence on the type of entertainment provided. The Winter Gardens, opened in 1878, best exemplifies the change in direction of the resort's entertainment policy, one driven by private enterprise. The sumptuous opening banquet in the presence of the Lord Mayor of London is indicative of the company's promised gardens, library, reading rooms, picture gallery, indoor promenade and concert hall, all for developing a genteel winter season away from the summer season masses. Now Brighton had already achieved this kind of separation by different seasons for different classes, but in Lancashire, Southport had preempted the fashionable autumn-winter season. The Blackpool Gazette reported the financial difficulties of the Winter Gardens, and it soon became evident that the summer season was to be the mainstay of income. The appointment of William Holland as manager in 1887, a man with 20 years' experience in London music halls, completed a tentative transition already in progress since the staging of a female human cannonball in 1879. The Winter Gardens still clung to a middle-class entertainment through the Opera House, staging hugely successful concerts by Enrico Caruso and Dame Nellie Melba, whilst the Empress Ballroom catered for the working-class love of dancing. The town also maintained a policy of social zoning, successfully achieved at Brighton with the West Brighton estate, but Blackpool's Claremont estate was not quite of the same value. House of Lords records reveal a comparison of £80 per annum rents against £190 to £475 in West Brighton. However, it still offered a better class of lodging and boarding houses at a safe distance from the central beach. An estate company utilising restrictive covenants maintained building standards. Similarly, South Shore prided itself on the patronage of fashionable Lancashire families. The Blackpool Gazette commented that moving from Blackpool to South Shore was like passing from Fleet Street to Temple Gardens. The examples of entertainment on Blackpool's three piers shows the different provision. Central Pier, concentrating on lighter fare. By the 1890s, popular entertainment dominated most of the central area. not the least Alderman John Bickerstaff's 518 feet replica of the Eiffel Tower, built in 1894. The total cost for the design and construction of the tower and buildings was around £290,000. The last time I looked, this as a share of GDP was £310 million. Throughout the world, only Atlantic City in America could rival Blackpool for its amenities. Famous stars such as Mary Lloyd performed for a three-figure sum at the Empire on Church Street, and the aging 70-year-old Blondin performed his high wire act at Rakes Hall Gardens in 1895. Frank Phillis, a circus manager, brought his military spectacle, Savage South Africa, to pander to any prevalent imperialist notions. He brought 100 Zulus, Matabele, Boers, and English South Africans. Unfortunately, the Boer War broke out and they were all repatriated. Phillis replaced them with Liverpool dockers and Jamaican labourers. The climax of the show was Phillis blazing away with two revolvers in a circle of dead horses and heroes. The show brought audiences to their feet with excitement and ended with a rousing rendering of God Save the Queen from all present. Nevertheless, hedged in as it was by middle-class enclaves, the central area was soon to expand. South Shore's only protection had been the prohibitive walk from Central, removed in 1885 with the opening of the whole coastline to the electric tramway. I'm just going to show you a black and white clip now of the trams. Now, I can't get any clips of the massive sand dune area between South Shore and Central. However, this does run over the space from St Anne's to Blackpool and shows the sand dunes there. And this is pretty much how it was in the South Shore area. So let's just take a look at that.
From those 2.5 million visitors of 1901 to 6 million visitors today, Blackpool still claims to be the largest tourist attraction in Britain.
Novelty, and a large crowd had assembled at St Anne's Square to ride through the sand dunes into Blackpool. Open cars of any kind were especially popular during the warm summer months. Even in the hottest weather, the Edwardians tended to overdress, the ladies shading themselves with parasols. For the moneyed classes, life must have seemed idyllic. With a breeze blowing, the packed car rolled along Clifton Drive North. This crocodile of schoolgirls had opted to use the tram tracks rather than the uneven road surface. Drifting sand would later be used as one of the excuses for scrapping the trams. Approaching former conduit car number 1. The company paid Blackpool an annual rental to use these tracks along Lytham Road, as well as twopence per unit for power. Before reaching the original terminus, passengers crested the Skew Bridge on the approach to South Shore Station. Following track alterations in July 1905, trams from Lytham would operate to 3 new, much more convenient termini at South Pier, Manchester Square and Central Station. Note the man, pole in hand, waiting to change the trolley, as a Blackpool car approaches from the direction of Royal Oak.
Okay, the final step, South Shore and the Pleasure Beach. South Shore was also susceptible to land development. Walton claims there was too much vacant land but no estate to set the tone. Showmen and gypsies had pitched opposite Victoria, South Pier, but the council purchased the land and evicted them. They simply moved further south onto the beach and the adjacent Watson's estate. The corporation, with an eye on commercial potential, became reluctant to suppress this new rising star. Once again, an area of Blackpool was primed and ready for outside influence. This time it would be the process of Americanization, the final step in completing Blackpool's image as a popular workers' resort. Between 1897 and 1904, a new development was taking place 10 miles outside New York City. The construction of 3 large amusement parks at Coney Island for $5 million. The Steeplechase, Luna Park and Dreamland. James Walvin describes them as monuments to mechanized fun, consumer spending power and the power of electricity. These new parks went against all the rational and improving campaigns representing an updated return to a pre-industrial age of carnival. A respite from formal, highly regulated social situations, Moorish minarets, Oriental temples and pagodas, fairy tale Gothic arches, lagoons, lakes and gondolas, all brightly lit by several million light bulbs to create a world of fantasy. Frederick Thompson, estate promoter of Luna Park, claimed to manufacture a carnival spirit, fast-moving child's play in exotic but respectable surroundings, and on no account attempt to educate. This hedonistic concept arrived in Britain at the turn of the century. Other towns adopted these ideas on a small scale, such as Rill's underground Venice. However, in 1901, an Anglo-American syndicate headed by W.G. Bean, great-grandfather of the current managing director Amanda Thompson, took control of the 40-acre site at Watson's estate. They brought with them ideas from Coney Island, such as Sir Hiram Maxim's flying machine. The syndicate was well aware of the economic potential of mass leisure and America's lead in technical forms of production. Now, the Blackpool Gazette commented on the local reaction. The Tower Company looks askance at the beach showman and the new Pleasure Beach amusement park at the southern end of the town. Perhaps the Tower Company was looking askance at the first real threat to its preeminence. Now, I'm just going to show another little clip. This is some actually old movie film of my own. This was taken in 1967, and it shows Blackpool by the end of the 60s. Pleasure Beach is the south end of Blackpool, and the Pleasure Beach area by that time. And it's a little bit grainy and a little bit jumpy and all that kind of thing, but I think it serves its purpose.
A light shone in the night some way ahead. Blue turned into green, then it was red. And stirring the night, love music played. The light I saw in the night was a penny arcade. Step up and play, each machine seemed to say, as I walked round and round the penny arcade. Just ring the bell on the big bagatelle, and you'll make all the colored lights cascade. And music played in the penny arcade. Yes, it played and it played all the time. Roll up and spend your last dime. At first I thought it a dream that I was in. Lost in a sea of glass and tin. but no, so dipping my hand in the back of my jeans, I grabbed a handful of coins to feed the machine. Step up and play, each machine seemed to say, as I walked round and round the penny arcade. Just ring the bell on the big bagatelle and you'll make all the colored lights cascade. And music played in the penny arcade. Yes, it played and it played all the time. Roll up and spend your last dime. Oh, step up and play, each machine seemed to say, as I walked round and round the penny arcade. Just ring the bell on the big bagatelle and you'll make all the colored lights cascade. And music played in a penny arcade. Yes, it played and it played all the time. Roll up and spend your last, roll up and spend your last, roll up and spend your last dime.
Many of South Shore's leading citizens now moved north and eastward as the process of proletarianising Blackpool's entertainments continued. Illuminations, fairground amusements, black-faced minstrels, and the penny arcades with American machinery such as the kinescope. Lewis claims that only the pleasure theatre was an English innovation, although by 1911 Blackpool also had 96 fish and chip shops. Further evidence of working class demand for the glorification of their inland pleasures and that Americanisation was only a part of the class conversion. By the outbreak of the First World War, the making of a popular resort was complete, with many more amusements such as variety, circuses, prize fights than it is possible to mention here. There are many implications of holiday development that time prohibits. An important research path might be the consequences for working class women, just as the advent of the fish and chip shop freed women from the stove for one evening a week, so the seaside holiday freed her from domestic chores in the home for possibly a whole week every year, and of course soon to be followed by the matinee, the cinema matinee, which was largely frequented by housewives. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to take another look. This is a dramatisation, however, it shows people in Blackpool on the pleasure beach, on the beach, the local beach there. And just look again at how they dress. This might be the 1960s, but people still coming to town in their suits and their frocks and all that. And it tells you something about attitudes towards this. Now, this clip is from a TV series in 1960. Which was intended just to be a 13-week series and never stopped running. It's been running ever since. And of course that's Coronation Street. You may recognise some of the old icons, if you will. The old icons of Coronation Street and Sharples and Elsie Tanner and so many others. And so here we go with this clip of Coronation Street. So, in conclusion, it had been necessary for certain conditions to exist in the town in order for it to develop as a working class resort. Namely, a freehold land system and a council dominated by vested interests. These were encouraged by a hinterland activity close by, sufficiently advanced economically to provide Blackpool with a huge market. Finally, conditions and timing rendered Blackpool free to absorb the new mechanised amusements from America. Other towns possessed some of these conditions. Morecambe had the freehold and the council, but not such an accessible hinterland. Southport and Lytham were close to the Lancashire mill towns, but dominated by leasehold covenants and powerful residents. Finally, Blackpool received permission years ahead of its rivals to use ratepayers' money to advertise and widen its catchment area nationally. Blackpool represents a return to pre-industrial forms, where enjoyment did not have to be educative or recreating. The screams of passengers on the roller coaster are not simply exhilaration, but the suspension of normal modes of behaviour and inversion of the normal rules in the manner of carnival, where the ordinary family can imagine themselves in grand and exotic locations, usually beyond their reach.